To welcome you all here tonight to the Ismaili Centre for what is the first in a series of events being organised by the Aga Khan Foundation and the Ismaili Council for the UK and its institutions, with this evening's event being jointly sponsored by the Aga Khan Education Board. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are fortunate to have with us Michael Kocher, AKF's General Manager, and Sheila Manji, AKF's Early Childhood Development Specialist, who are both perfectly placed to talk about the work of the Foundation and its commitment to breaking the cycle of poverty. Mr. Kocher, who is based in Geneva, has been AKF's General Manager since 2013, when he took over from the late Tom Kessinger. Prior to this role, he served as Vice President of International Programs for the International Rescue Committee based in New York, an organization he was with for some 20 years. With expertise in multi-sector development, civil society programs, and refugee and migration populations, as well as emergency response in highly complex conflict and disaster settings, Mr. Kocher oversees AKF's programs globally. Sheila Manji, also based in Geneva, has been with AKF's education program for the last 6 years, working on initiatives which support understanding and implementation of quality early childhood programs from conception to 8 years of age. As an example, Sheila spearheads the AKDN Science of Early Child Development Initiatives in close collaboration with institutional partners in Canada and the Aga Khan University Institute for Human Development. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Mr. Michael Kocher.
Azar, thank you so much for the gracious introduction. I also want to thank Naguib Karaj, my good friend and colleague, AKF UK's National Committee Chair, the National Committee members here tonight, as well as the UK National Council, with special mention, the Aga Khan Education Board. I first met Naguib about 3 years ago during my interviews here upstairs overlooking the garden. I'm slightly less nervous tonight. I also thank the very excellent AKF UK team under Stacey Frost, very capable leadership, and the staff here at the exquisite Ismaili Center for welcoming all of us so warmly tonight. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, in London in 2008 at the banquet, which marked his Golden Jubilee visit, His Highness the Aga Khan spoke about why he feels so compelled to tackle the issues of poverty around the world. His Highness noted within Islam, I quote, "The world of the spirit and the world of daily life are inseparably intertwined." And he went to further explain his efforts include, again I quote, "social, economic, and cultural endeavors in order to secure the well-being of the Ismailis and communities amongst which they live." The Aga Khan Development Network has grown out of these efforts. His Highness consistently, through the years, has addressed and instilled throughout AKDN key principles: human dignity, self-reliance, quality of life, the importance of family and community, the critical role of civil society in development, meritocracy, opportunity, emphasis on education at all levels, sustainability, culture, the importance of a cosmopolitan ethic, and the imperative of pluralism. Just a word on that last one. Pluralism is of the utmost importance, perhaps now more than ever, as it goes well beyond tolerance. It goes to the very embrace and celebration of human diversity. Indeed, AKDN's work overall to alleviate poverty is deeply rooted in core ethical principles that I find profoundly compelling, in fact, inspiring. And I say so as someone not from the Jamaat, nor from the broader Ummah, but these principles speak to me, as I submit they speak to you, as part of our shared humanity. I joined AKF about 2.5 years ago. Some days I wake up and it seems like yesterday. Some days I wake up, it seems like 10 years. I worked for many, many years, as I noted, for a group called the International Rescue Committee. They're based in New York. It's now headed by a gentleman named David Miliband. I suspect at least some of you have heard of him. I'm happy to report that the former foreign minister is doing a very good job indeed. IRC took me to many conflict zones and poverty-stricken countries around the world through the years. I've spent significant time in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Bosnia, Croatia, South Sudan, DR Congo, Kenya, Ivory Coast, Liberia, Indonesia, where I met my wife, Haiti, and elsewhere. I've seen in myriad contexts how the vicious cycle of poverty can seem utterly intractable, endemic, made worse by severe natural disasters, as well as recurring human conflict. At the same time, though, I've seen how smart, sustained development efforts can help break this cycle. And I proudly say here tonight, AKDN stands among other important development actors helping spearhead sustainable, integrated, community-driven solutions to poverty. I wasn't looking to leave my former employer, but at the same time, I increasingly felt that the predominantly humanitarian work I was engaged in was somehow insufficiently addressing the most fundamental root causes of fragility, suffering, and poverty. It was coming too far downstream. So when the phone rang in Manhattan that day and the search firm said it concerned the Aga Khan Foundation, needless to say, I took the call. Because addressing the fundamental root causes required for effective development is exactly what we do and what we do well. You'll notice I'm deliberate tonight in speaking about AKDN more broadly, the Aga Khan Development Network. While my role, my privileged role, is leading the Aga Khan Foundation, AKF is but one agency within a holistic development network that works together to advance shared goals. His Highness has consistently emphasized this point with AKDN's senior leaders. Think network-wide. Think how we leverage all the assets, all the tools we have. His vision and intent is an integrated network, one with different dimensions of development, connected and leveraged, leading to improved and sustained quality of life. We work in the economic sphere through the Aga Khan Fund for Economic Development, ACFED, the cultural sphere via the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, and finally the social development sphere, including AKF, 2 universities, a network of schools and healthcare centers, a habitat-focused agency which will soon come online, a microfinance agency, and others. When you combine all of this with our global partnerships, and most critically, I think, the absolutely unique added value of Jamaati volunteerism, the result is one we can all be proud of. I have to say, one of the things that struck me is, unique is a word that's overused, but I think tonight we'll use it. All of you sitting here tonight, I've met children, I've met sons, daughters, moms, dads, grandparents, and service goes back generations. It is a feature of your community that I really think is something special, and it's a privilege to be part of this. Let me say a few words about AKF itself. We were founded in 1967 with our global head office in Geneva. We have 4,000 employees around the world. The overwhelming majority of them are national staff. We're active in 20 countries, in Central Asia's most remote mountainous geographies, in India and Bangladesh and South Asia, within various sub-Saharan African countries, in Syria and Egypt and the Middle East, in Russia and Portugal, where we work to improve the quality of life of migrants and others, and of course in the US, Canada, and here in the UK. Broadly speaking, we do 2 things at AKF. Number 1, we implement effective programs. Number 2, we seek to develop key partnerships for the support of our work. Firstly, we implement programs to improve quality of life in some of the world's very poorest areas. The programs are within the themes of rural development, education, which includes, of course, early childhood development, and pre-tertiary school improvement programs, community health, habitat, civil society. These programs benefit both the Jamaat and non-Jamaati beneficiary populations that Jamaat lives among. We seek to make a meaningful difference across the entire areas in which we work through our broad non-denominational programming and a long-term commitment to communities. It must be said the needs are great. We know half of the world's poor live on less than 150 pounds per day, 1.50 pounds per day. Nearly 1 billion people are unable to read a book or sign their name. 250 million people lack access to even basic health care services. The gap between the haves and have-nots is widening and in danger of calcifying, with significant ethical, social, and political consequences that have the potential to last for generations. Further, many places AKF works are regularly affected by disasters. We know where they are: Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Pakistan. Others have been long affected by conflict, as is the case in Afghanistan and Syria. These challenges span generations, and there is an urgent need to address them most effectively through well-planned multi-sector approaches, all with the understanding, and we have to be clear about this, there are no simple, quick solutions. Of particular importance, I think, is education and opportunity for youth, including youth employment. And this is an issue that we're going to increasingly focus our attention on in AKDN and across the network as a whole, and across the foundation as well, engaging governments and other partners. I've been very privileged since I started to visit many countries for AKF, and I've seen a range of innovations and programs. I can really tell you that our programs are effective, our approaches work. Why do they work? Because they take long-term perspectives to developments. His Highness described to us in a meeting not so long ago, when you think midterm, think 25 years. My previous organization, we thought in quarters. With AKF being active nearly 50 years in certain places like Pakistan and Kenya, a country incidentally I first saw as a foreign student at the University of Nairobi in 1979. Just pause and let the record show I had hair then. And it was in Kenya that I first witnessed His Highness's institutions and enduring investments in social development. You see them now, you see how they've grown as you go to Kenya today. As I learned then, and as I know far better now, our approaches work because they are holistic and because they are community-driven, and because they look across geographic frontiers, across mountains, across rivers, including regional efforts in Central Asia and East Africa. And I think they work, if I can say, due to our emphasis on quality, benchmarks and standards, creating models which can be replicated and scaled, like our flagship rural support program implemented as we speak in Pakistan, Kyrgyzstan, elsewhere. But we know we can and must do more even than this. We see in many places the need for increased economic development programs, particularly for youth, as I mentioned. And today, we have to say it, we see migration patterns fundamentally reshaping many development contexts. Migration matters are not going to be solved unless you begin addressing the reasons why people are fleeing their home countries. As I said, we can do better. In what areas? One that comes to mind, the area of monitoring and evaluation, research, the use of data. Knowledge management toward ever higher quality standards is an area where we continue to intensify our collective efforts to show impact, that what we do makes a difference in an efficient way, in a sustainable way. I mentioned we have two areas of endeavor. The second, in addition to implementing programs, a core mandate we have is to develop partnerships and to mobilize resources in order to support our own efforts and those of other AKDN agencies globally. Most of our resource mobilization efforts take place in our so-called donor units in Canada, the US, and critically here in the UK, including the generous support received so many of you who are here tonight. AKF's office in the UK leads our important European relationships, liaising with partners such as UK DFID, Germany, Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands, the European Union, as well as private companies such as Johnson & Johnson. The team here, and AKF more broadly, has lasting partnerships of mutual interest as well with others like the World Bank, the Asia Development Bank, Canada, the US government, Switzerland, France, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, the Gates Foundation, many more. His Highness the Aga Khan referenced these relationships within that speech in 2008 here in London, stating, I quote, "These partnerships have evolved many collaborators, governmental and private, academic and charitable, nonprofit and commercial, religious and secular, national and international, providing not only financial resources, but also human resources and intellectual capital. Key aspect of our support for us, of course, includes individual and corporate contributions. These help us match funds, and they help leverage support from institutional donors. An example not long ago is how our private funds from donors like you allowed us to leverage European funding to support victims of flooding in Tajikistan. Another example is in the US, where our own sources of funds recently enabled us to secure significant favorable concessionary debt financing from an organization called OPEC. It's a US investment body in support of the University of Central Asia, which has campuses in Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. UCA is an integral part of AKDN and will only be more so through the years. These sources combined allow AKF's global scale to reach nearly $300 million globally. Still, we strive to do more. I think an example that we've not tapped in the UK is corporate match funding. Many corporations give money through corporate social responsibility efforts, and I think there's an opportunity for us here to do more. If you will, I'd like to now speak briefly about 3 specific projects that I've seen since I've started here, among many. And these highlight AKF's program approaches to breaking the cycle of poverty. Let me start with 2 agricultural programs, one in Mozambique and one in Madagascar. You'll note the slides. Agriculture is critical in most of our geographies, even as it gets harder to make a living as a farmer. The northernmost provinces in Mozambique where AKF works have some of the highest poverty rates in the country. 1 in 4 children do not survive past the age of 4. Life expectancy is under 40 years. Since 2010, AKF has been working across Mozambique's north to tackle these challenges. With 95% of rural households involved in agricultural production, working with smallholder farmers was a sensible place to start. The region has very rich soil, but farming practices are outdated and not resilient to the increasingly destructive effects of climate change, such as increasing floods, droughts, and erratic rainfall patterns. Farms are also scattered in very remote areas, limiting farmers' access to markets and vice versa. In response, we work with farmers to increase resilience, productivity, and the range of crops they grow. We have expert agronomists training farmers to incorporate new techniques such as something called conservation agriculture. I will confess to you, when I started, I did not know what conservation agriculture was. And I submit there are at least a few of you in the audience that don't know either. I will briefly describe it. In some respects, this technique undoes centuries of farming practices. For one, it demands that farmers do not plow their fields at all, and instead cover their soil with wet straw or leaves. For many farmers, this is an extremely difficult adjustment to make due to past practice, what they learned from their father, what they learned from their mother, and the emotional pull, frankly, of plowing fields in preparation for sowing. However, conservation agriculture protects soils from the erosive power of the sun and rain to maintain its structure, biodiversity, and its productivity, which I think taps out my scientific ability to talk about this topic. But I will tell you, when you pick up that soil and feel it, you can understand that's something different, the richness of it. The result? In many areas, we're seeing a 50% increase in average maize, sesame, and bean yields. This has encouraged nearly 8,000 farmers to begin practicing the new techniques, contributing significantly to improved food security. As we had hoped, conservation agriculture is being adopted more widely by farmers we don't even directly work with, through word of mouth, through best practice. It's a promising development. We're also helping to organize these farmers into groups so that they can sell in bulk, a more enticing proposition for private sector buyers. Moreover, selling in bulk, farmers can command a higher price for their produce. The net impact of this is that today, tens of thousands of people in Mozambique are able to have 3 meals a day. Due to increased productivity and incomes, farming also represents for many a newly viable livelihood. This was not the case 5 years ago. We're seeing some positive changes. Not long ago, I was also in Madagascar. There, we're observing other green shoots of progress. The area where we work is in the north, which is the same in the Mozambique context, suffers from profound food insecurity, with 82% of the people living in abject poverty. Madagascar is among the very poorest places on earth, and when you see it, it is staggering. Since 2005, AKF has been working with more than 25,000 smallholder farmers to improve the productivity of rice farming, the staple in that country, but also to diversify crops. We help them grow nutritious sweet potatoes, cassava, sorghum, jackfruit, breadfruit. So far, our efforts have tripled rice yields. We're also working to better link these farmers to markets to ensure a steadier income. Currently, 43,000 people are benefiting from higher incomes, greater food security, a more nutritious diet, a first step in breaking the cycle of poverty. We're also now looking to introduce other higher value cash crops such as vanilla, artemisia, which is used to fight malaria, sesame, cocoa, cinnamon, chili peppers, all of these to increase income still. Let me please turn to another activity illustrative of how our efforts support community-based savings groups, this time in India. Over half of the world's people lack access to formal banking services. Most of us probably hit an ATM machine today. Half the world has no bank account. India's poorest state, Bihar, the per capita income is around 1/3 the average for India at around 300 pounds annually. This equates to less than 1 pound per day, 85 pence. Just think about that. It's very difficult to comprehend. It's impossible for me to comprehend raising a family on 85 pence a day. Recognize the importance of safe places to save money. AKF introduced community-based saving groups in Bihar in 2010. The model is very simple. Voluntary groups include 15 to 25 people each who save jointly, and they take small loans from the funds saved, which help to meet their needs around investment, consumption, and emergencies. The savings groups provide them first steps toward financial security, and we train these groups to manage their transactions independently. If the model is simple, the results are strong. Around 40,000 people have joined 2,000 groups with a 30-pound average individual savings. That amount is very significant given the per capita income and the lack of household safety nets. It makes a difference. These savings have helped people cover their children's education expenses, health costs, improve their homes, support retirement needs, improve financial literacy. These are merely two examples of so many that we could talk about. I was sitting in my hotel across the street before coming, and while I have nicely typed out remarks, I scribbled a couple other things that are very compelling. I might be able to read them without my glasses, but we'll see. One is girls' education, where even modest investment does wonders over time. Girls' education programs improve health outcomes, as mothers completing primary education have maternal death rates that are 2/3 lower. It also raises household income, GDP growth, and employment. Quite simply, it empowers. Educate a girl. Another effort is our rural support work in northern Pakistan, another place I was privileged to go, among the most remote and beautiful places I've ever seen, where we engage communities to build and run micro-hydraulic projects, harnessing abundant water sources to generate affordable electricity. Many of these places have never had electricity before, ever. The transformative effects are apparent and plain, from kids able to do homework at night to the creation of businesses. We are scaling our efforts, and we're continuing to innovate across all themes and focus areas. I think one thing that AKF has not done sufficiently in the UK over the years, the last 10 years certainly, is engage the Jamaat. I think we have some work to do. We intend to do it. We're here tonight with that in mind. I think this is an important step, but we have further steps to take. We want to take them with you. Please consider being part of this, whether through your volunteer energies, financial donations, or participating in events and activities like the Volunteer Partnership Walks, which AKF will soon bring back to the UK. By all means, too, just stop by and see us, say hello. My hope is that you are now and will be ever more proud to share in AKF's work and can identify with it in breaking the cycle of poverty. I'm very delighted. My friend and colleague Sheila Manji, who leads AKF's early childhood development efforts, is here to speak on this key work. His Highness puts great emphasis on ECD, early childhood development. there's a temptation in our line of work to simply speak in acronyms. When I started with AKF, I was handed a folder of acronyms. I've heard people speak in entire paragraphs without actually saying a word. I have seen a good many of our early childhood centers and classrooms, and they really are remarkable. They are touching and they are inspired, and any of you as parents would be well pleased to see your kids in those centers and schools. I would be. Finally, lastly, before handing things over to Sheila, I hope I have at least given you some sense of our critical work globally and how much we hope you will want to be a part of it. Not just to know what we do, but to feel viscerally connected to it. I also hope on a personal note that I've somehow managed to convey at least a bit the profound sense of privilege I feel to be involved in this network, to have this job, and how humbled I am really to be part of AKDM, and how honored I am to be with you here tonight. Thank you. Thank you all so much for your attendance, your participation. It's my great privilege to hand things over to Sheila, one of AKF's most talented staff members. Sheila.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to the Aga Khan Foundation UK and the National Council, particularly the Aga Khan Education Board, for organizing this event. It is a true, true honor to be amongst all of you, those of you sitting in the room today, and those of you joining us virtually. And I want to say a special thank you to Michael. When this event was organized, he was the one to say, please come and do this with me. And I feel particularly privileged that you thought of me, particularly because of the theme. The theme is breaking the cycle of poverty, and what better way than to start at early childhood. So what I hope to do today is to give you a sense of what is this thing called early child development. We hear about it so much, but do we really know what we're talking about? And I can't give you everything today, but hopefully I'll give you a sense, a little bit of a flavor of what we are doing in the network, and more specifically what the foundation is doing. And hopefully that will give you a flavor and a sense of other things you might be able to engage in through your programs here or through work with us. So first, what do we mean by early childhood? Many people tend to narrow this definition down into the preschool years. And in actuality, the international definition is from conception to age 8. And that's the definition that we adopt. Those groupings, age groupings there, they're very loose. They change from country to country. But in theory, we have conception, a critical period in life where a lot of the new research is telling us that there is actually quite a lot happening in prenatal development, and a lot of that, of what is influencing prenatal development, is coming from the environment. And that continues through those first 8 years of life. In particular, the first 3 years of life. Some of you may be very well aware of the latest evidence in early brain development, and it is telling us that those first 3 years especially are extremely, extremely crucial to laying that foundation. Not just for the individual, for their health, for their academic success, for their self-esteem, but also for the population of the community and also the society. So when we talk about early childhood, we're not talking about just preschool. We're talking about everything under the sun, and I'll give you a sense of what all that means, from conception to age 8. The foundation and the network as a whole, our early childhood programs are in over 20 countries around the world. Those are the ones shaded in the darker blue. Annually, these programs are reaching about 600,000 children. Now, I must confess, this number is an underestimate. This number reflects only the numbers of children that are benefiting from a program that is reached through an education intervention. So it's most likely children in that 3 to 6 age group and 6 to 8 age group. But if we add to that the numbers of children that are being reached through our health programs, through our rural development programs, through our companies, Serena Hotels, the Frigokin factory in Nairobi, the Ivoire Cotton in West Africa, they also have programs that are reaching young children. When you start to add all of those in, we are probably reaching somewhere around 1 million children every year. Of this number here, the 600,000, probably about 90% of that is through AKF's work. So for example, the picture on the right over there, that's a picture of a little girl who's attending an early childhood center in Tajikistan. In 2009, we began a community-based model of early childhood. At that time, access to an early childhood center for preschool children between the ages of 4 and 6 years was 7%. We started looking at ways to create early learning opportunities for these children, and we started to explore in the communities what the opportunities were. We found that there were many underutilized classrooms in primary schools. So we began to find spaces in all these schools. We found there were many primary school teachers without jobs. We found there were many communities of women that were looking to get involved. We started training them. We created these classes where communities were contributing to the space, to the materials, and also to the teachers' salaries. Now, in 5 years, that access rate has gone up to 49%. So we went from 7% to 49% in just 5 years. And even better, the national government has adopted this model and is now taking it across the country. So all children of preschool age across Tajikistan will benefit. The finance minister has agreed to pay the salaries of these teachers. We're just waiting for that little signature to happen. But that is an indication of where the commitment is in Tajikistan. The picture on the left is a picture from Afghanistan. The critical point here is Afghanistan is just embarking on its process of preschool education. And we, in 2014, conducted a study in which we were able to show the benefits of children participating in these early years programs. And the results were so dramatic. There was a 31 percentage point difference between those going to a program and those not. And those results resonated so strongly with the national government that they are now developing a preschool policy. And now AKF and Aga Khan Education Services are working with the national government to develop the preschool curricula and to develop the training and to roll out the model across the country. This is a very scary looking picture. This is the AKDN ECD framework. The important thing to notice here is that there are many things that make up this framework. In the middle, at the heart of all of this is the children and the families. Around that, we're talking about all the contexts that influence those children and families. We have the services, the schools, the places of worship, the ECD centers, the health facilities, all of those contexts influence the child. And then beyond that, in the outer ring, we have all those services in the level of the system, all those places where people are getting trained to be doctors, to be nurses, to be teachers, or the budget, or the policy. All of these things have an impact on what ends up being the life of that child. And in the outer ring, those little pieces that are there, those point to the issues that we are concerned with. Not just the health and education of the child, but issues around food security, economic security, culture, and equity. I'm going to give you a flavor of 3 different programs. One that is around health and the work we're doing to reach children under the age of 3. One that is around ensuring parents are able to support their children's learning, even in very, very hard places like Bihar, is the one I'll show you, which Michael talked about just now, and an example of early childhood centers in some parts of our programs. So this is in Tajikistan, this particular photo, but the same thing applies in Kyrgyzstan. In this particular photo, a mother is coming for her regular visit to the doctor after the birth of her son. And normally in this visit, the doctor would say, check the weight, check the height, check that everything's okay, physical, we're fine, and end this consultation there. What we have been doing is working with these doctors, nurses, community health workers to extend that conversation. This is a critical opportunity to talk to that mother about her child and her relationship with her child. So this doctor goes on and asks the mother, how do you make your child smile? How do you talk to your child? How do you play with your child? And she'll listen to what the mother says. And she might ask the mother to show her, well, you say you tell your child to smile, because often that's what the answer is. When you ask, how do you make your child smile? They say, I say smile. That is very often the answer, so show us, okay. And the doctor then might say, well, let's try another strategy. Maybe you want to tickle your baby. Oh, you got a smile. And all of a sudden you start to see a change in the mother saying, oh, I hadn't tried that before. Maybe I'll try that again. Maybe I'll try something else. And so that mother's likely to go home and try different things with her child to make him smile. And through this pattern, what we see is that this child who perhaps would have missed out on some of those really, really simple experiences and moments with his mother, sorry, it's a boy, now is having a different kind of experience at home. And just imagine if over time those experiences get repeated, get extended, what kind of relationship this child will have with his mother, and what kind of relationship this mother will have with her child, and what that will mean when that child goes into school. What kind of person will that be? And so on and so forth. This program has so far worked with 300 healthcare professionals across Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. We are now in the process of scaling this up. Over the next 3 years, we will be working with another 600 healthcare professionals. But even more importantly, we will be working with WHO, with UNICEF, and the government to work on the roadmap of how do we take this simple little activity in one health facility to all health facilities across the country. Moving around the world to India. So you heard a little bit about Bihar earlier on. This mother who is looking at a book with her 2 young children, she's illiterate. She cannot read, she cannot write. And she, like many of the other women that we work with in all of our programs, cannot read and write. So why would she be looking at a book? The female literacy rate in India is 64%. In Bihar is 54%. In the districts where we're working, 40%. Why would we pay attention to this? Why would we even encourage someone to look at a book who can't read and write? 2 reasons. We know parents are the child's first teachers. We believe this fundamentally. The parent is the child's first teacher. And second, we know from all the research that being read to as a child is probably one of the best predictors of the child's later academic success. So what do you do when you have a context where there are no books, usually, and if there are, they're not books for really young children, and you have people that can't read? We provide the books. We create little libraries, and in this particular case, the library is with a community-based savings group. So at the end of the community-based savings group session, the weekly session, there is a community volunteer who's been trained to be a librarian, who's been taught how to read books, how to make it fun, how to make it exciting, how to make it interesting. We don't care about the writing on the page. We care about the story. And they model how to read the story. And what we do is we focus on the pictures. They tell the story through the pictures. The important part here is a story is being told. And there is a time there where the parent is spending time with their children, and the children are spending time with their parent. And it's around a story, and they're having a good time. Interestingly, in this particular community, what happened was the mothers started to get more and more curious. And they started to come to us and say, well, we're really enjoying this, but could you now help us teach us how to read and write? And from this emerged a literacy program for the mothers. Now imagine how powerful that's going to be now. That mother is now saying, I want to take an interest in what my child is doing. And when my child goes to school, I want to make sure that I can read what my child is writing and what my child is bringing home, and I can check their homework. And we know that if the mother is able to read and the mother's involved in their child's schoolwork, then the child is more likely to finish school, and that means they're more likely to have a more prosperous future. Finally, let me take you to East Africa. Many of you have probably heard about this program. It's probably the one that is most talked about, and it's probably where our beginnings are when we talk about early childhood. This is the Madrasa Early Childhood Program in East Africa. It started in the 1980s. This particular picture is from a community-based preschool in Kenya, in the coast of Kenya. In the 1980s, there were Muslim leaders who were feeling that their children were not prepared adequately to enter into grade 1. And this was because they had to write entrance exams and they were failing the entrance exam. So they could not enter into primary school. But they were seeing that other children were entering, and these children were participating in other preschool programs. But they conflicted with the timings of the madrasa, the time for the religious education. And so they requested support in finding a way that we could bring this together. How could we ensure that the children still got their religious education, but also got the necessary education they needed to be able to enter into primary school? So the program began in Kenya. It later moved on to Uganda and also Zanzibar. It's been about 30 years now that we've been involved in this program. They established over 230 community-based preschools in that period, reaching over 90,000 children. Many of those children have graduated now. They're now in high school or they've moved on. Some of those children are now working back in the madrasa program as trainers for new teachers. What's been interesting to see is the transformation in the last few years. This program emerged in a context and a climate where nobody was talking about early childhood. There were no policies, there were no standards, nothing was expected. And now it's all changed. Governments have policies about at least 1 year of pre-primary education. They have all these fancy documents that say what teachers need to have, but nobody knows how to do it except madrasa. And now they're coming to us and saying, can you help us? Can you come train our teachers? Can you help us establish pre-primary classrooms in our schools? So this program that started out as a very much grassroots community-based program, they're now government-recognized teacher training institutes in each of their countries. And they're now businesses. And it's been amazing to watch their transformation from people that were very, very focused on their community to now being focused upon how many pages is this? Because an extra page will cost me this much more money to print this. And their mindset has completely changed, but that history of experience that they have on the ground with those teachers, with those children, has helped them get to where they are now and has created now a platform where they can support others as they go on, whether that's government, other organizations, private, community, what be it, they will have a role to play there. If I think about what's really been at the heart, why have we gotten to where we are today? I think Michael alluded to some of these, but I think the first is we stay in a particular geography for a very long time. Right? These madrasa programs started over 30 years ago now. And we've continued with them. We've learned constantly, are learning and changing and growing as we go along. We look at what are the community resources, what are the assets, what do people bring, what do they have, what are the existing places, existing platforms that you can tap into. How can you draw on the local knowledge, local resources, whether that's human, whether that's financial, whether it's services that are there. How can we make it contextually relevant? Respect and draw on the local context, not just for the content, but also the design, timings of when programs happen. That can be the make or break of many programs. In Kyrgyzstan, children used to go to a full-day kindergarten program, and all we did was make a subtle change and say, let's have shift model. Some children in the morning, some children in the afternoon, 100% access. It's a small thing, but it can make a huge difference. And I think the other strength for us is that, yes, we're on the ground. We're engaged in the implementation. We're engaged in working with these communities. But we don't do it alone. We're always doing it in partnership. It's always with the communities, with the government, with other organizations, be they international or local, and increasingly with private sector. This is a new area that comes up more and more now. Private sector, whether you're a company or associations in the bank, hotels, you're interested. You're curious, what can I do? How can I get involved? And this is true even within the network. The companies in the network are also asking this. And this is something we're exploring now of what can we do? How can we engage this interest? Not just financial interest, but you have access to networks. You have access to resources, materials. Madrasa, for example, used to go and hunt down the factory nearby and get all the cardboard from the factory and bring that into the preschool to make their materials. There are other ways than money to get involved. So we look forward to having that conversation with you as we go forward, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Sheila, for such a fantastic presentation. This really was a great opportunity for us to hear about the work that AKF is doing in addressing ECD across the world and more about what you do as well. I'd now like to open the floor for any questions for our speakers. For this, I'd like to call up Michael back to the stage and also Nagib Keraj, AKF National Committee Chairman for the UK. At the front over here.
Thank you for a brilliant presentation. I would like to know how can some of these programs that you've mentioned, the ones you've mentioned, how can they influence and inform what we know, and how can we participate as a Jamaati member for these programs?
I think there's a few ways. I think one is a basic one is that the financial contributions that the Jamaat makes, many of those are going towards these programs. And for example, many of the centers in Tajikistan specifically have been supported through individual financial contributions from Jamaati members. I think in terms of the programs are very contextually specific, and they're very much responding to specific needs in that country. But there are materials that come out of those programs. They might be curricula, they might be children's literature, they might be any kinds of materials. We're now working on technology also. We're looking at ways to do TV programs. We're already doing TV programs in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan that really encourage families to read with their children. And we're also looking at apps now. And so at the moment, the point of contact is me for any information. But hopefully in due course, I think there'll be ways to think about a central place. Some of it is on the website, on akdn.org. Some of the materials are already there, but happy to share additional.
And just to add to what Sheila said, the UK Jamaat has been a big supporter of these programs over many years. So when that Madrasa program started in East Africa, it was supported very actively by the UK Jamaat through the partnership walks. And the same in Kyrgyzstan. And the program Michael was talking about, the Madagascar Rice Project, was significantly pushed forward by contribution from this community in the UK.
Great, thank you very much. Do we have another question?
Thank you. I appreciate what you said was that your work is very much about the long term. But what do you do in a situation where there is an emergency which is absolutely horrendous, like, for example, the plight of the Syrian refugees? How do you work in a situation like that, and how do you get the Jamaat involved to work in a situation like that?
I'll take the first crack at answering that one. For Syria specifically, prior to the conflict, we were in Syria. There's a long-standing Jamaat in Syria in a city called Solomia, but they live elsewhere as well. And we were engaged in Syria doing long-term development programs around employment opportunities, education, other things. Obviously now things have changed, and we have changed with it. We have a very large and committed team, overwhelmingly Syrian nationals, leading an emergency effort in water provision, in emergency medical response, and a range of other endeavors. But even as that happens, we're beginning vocational training programs as well, because life goes on, and one has to be ready for what we call the reconstruction phase in that beautiful but now horrifically suffering country. More broadly, across the network, there's a group called Focus, which I think you've probably heard of. It's a Jamaati organization that has very capable staff that are engaged in emergency response, humanitarian response. Syria makes the news. There are many smaller scale crises that don't, whether it's a landslide in Afghanistan, flooding in Tajikistan. It's a long list, unfortunately, and I think the network is quite good. I've spent a lot of years doing this kind of work, and I have to say I've been quite impressed with the expertise, the excellence, and surely the commitment of the network's emergency response capacity. I don't know if you'd have anything to add.
I mean, you're aware of the time and knowledge, Nazrana, and I'd say that's another avenue through which the Jamaat can contribute, and many have already contributed in many, many, many ways across this network. And that is an opportunity to contribute your skills in a particular area. It may be Syria, it may be another area. But I think we also have to remember that the Jamaat is moving around a lot, and there are quite a few Syrians, Afghans, and others coming from other countries that are coming here to Europe. And so what can we do here in Europe to be ready to work with those communities that are coming? And some of that's already underway in Portugal, in Norway, and in Germany. Some of that has already started. But what else could we do? And what could we do right here?
Any more questions? Great. Just over here in the middle.
Hi. So we understand that AKF's work is pretty diverse, both thematically and geographically. Could you elaborate on what are the factors or what information helps you decide the focus area or the geography of the intervention?
Maybe you may want to address this as well. I'll begin. I think it's a mix of factors. Certainly, a fundamental consideration is assisting Jamaati communities globally. And where you find the Jamaat, you will find an Ekadian institution. It's that simple. But it's not limited to that. We also work in places where there are very small Jamaati communities. We have programs in Mali. We have programs in the Ivory Coast. I think it's needs-based. It can stem from things that His Highness identifies when he travels, when he meets world leaders, and then he follows up and tasks us with following through. But I would say that the primary lens that we're looking through is a needs-based one, where we can add value given our sectors and the unique aspects that we have on offer. But Naguib, you've been around a long time.
Just to broaden that question a little bit from AKF, in general, AKF is working where other AKDN agencies are also working. So there is a preference to do things where there's multiple ways of having an impact, as opposed to each agency being isolated in a particular area. So that's certainly one. We are somewhat influenced in scale of what we can do by what there is funding to do, but we try very much not to be donor-driven, so we do very few things because there's money available to do them. But where there is money available to support things we already know we want to do, and I give you the example of over the last probably 12 or 15 years, there's been a lot of money in the donor agencies available to support work in Afghanistan. We had an interest in doing more work in Afghanistan, but we probably did more because there was more funding available from development agencies. So in a sense, we are influenced partly by what we can actually fund. We're influenced by the other activities that we're doing in the same places and where the need is.
At the back.
This is a question for Michael. Michael, you said in your presentation that you would like to engage more from an AKF point of view with the Jamaati, and you haven't done that, you feel, over the last 10 years. Now, I hear a lot of youth of today say that they would like to engage themselves in a voluntary capacity with the institutions, but that there is no defined pathway. I think we are losing a generation of these people, these kids, who go to other institutions, other charitable bodies, but the AKF is lacking in that regard and the other institutions within the umbrella of AKF. Now, I think that if you tap the resources of the youth at that time, then they might come back in later years, and if only that by doing work at a ground level, it will broaden their horizon. and you might find that they might come back, devote of their skills in a professional manner. Now, what I want to ask is that is there a program that could effectively be structured in that way?
I think your observations are spot on, and there is a program that we're now beginning to design, a professional development, a young professionals program, for example, where we are planning to launch it. The groundwork will be laid in the coming year, and we hope to launch it in full during the Jubilee year in 2017, where we will bring in a number of young professionals really at the beginning arc of their career in a structured way, certainly with an AKF, but my hope is that it would extend to other AKDN agencies as well. We would look to bring diverse members of the Jamaat into that program, and I think that is one way, and it would be for a 2-year period, and then from that we will work with our HR teams, other agencies, we hope, then to allow people a career path into other aspects of AKDN. It's a critical point. I have noticed since coming in, there are many, many individuals of a certain generation that are within AKDN, and it is impressive. But I see a smaller number of younger professionals that are within the network. We have them. We have one here. We have others. They're superb. But we need to attract more, I think. And please take some solace in the fact that these discussions are ongoing. The issues you've raised are very much on the plate of all of us within leadership at the board level and elsewhere. Naguib, I don't know if you have thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, just more specifically in terms of AKF in the UK, Azhar, who was introducing earlier, has just come on board to be the person, to be the bridge with the Jamaat here. And I would encourage anybody who does want to get involved in a voluntary capacity to make contact with Azhar. We're going to be restarting a bunch of activities which will need volunteer people involved in orchestrating those activities. So we'd be really happy to have the help.
As we are now running out of time, we can only take one more question, so please do raise your hand if you have any other questions. At the back there, please.
It was really nice to hear about the fact that you said the graduates of the madrasa program who are now back teaching or training. Does AKF or AKDN sponsor or commission, or are you aware of other longitudinal research that's being done to look at the long-term impact of AKF or AKDN programs? And is this something that then is published on the website that the Jamaat can also read about? Because I think things like that are really heartening.
Thank you. Most longitudinal research has actually been conducted in Europe or in North America, and that's something we're hoping to change. There is recently an Institute for Human Development that's been established at the Aga Khan University, and that's one of their primary areas, is to think about what areas of research are lacking in our geographies that can contribute and help all of us, whether it's in those countries or in other countries, advance this discussion and advocate for more resources for these programs. The madrasa program in particular, we did a study with Oxford University in the early 2000s. Some of you may be aware of it. And that study looked at the cognitive gains, so how children were developing over the 3-year preschool program, whether they'd participated in a program supported by the Madrasa Early Childhood Program, some other type of preschool, or no preschool. And in that study, we showed, or we found, that children who had attended a madrasa-supported program had the greatest cognitive gains. Now, that was about 15 years ago, that study, and we've been doing some legwork over the last couple of years to try and find those children. And our intent, and it's already on the works, we're just trying to get the money to do it, but it is the plan now is to go and look with the Institute for Human Development, with other researchers that have specialized skills in this area, to look at what's the trajectory of their lives. What have they achieved over these last 15 years? Are they still in school? Did they finish school? What's their personal aspirations? What's their professional aspirations? What's their health outcomes? and tell that story. And even if we only get the stories of the children supported by the madrasa program, that's still stories. But we're hoping to create the first ever longitudinal follow-up of children in these low-income countries.
Thank you, Sheila. Do we have anything else to add on that last question? Okay, great. I'm really sorry, we are going to have to stop there as we have now run out of time, but thank you all for your questions. Sheila, Michael and Nagib, thank you very much for such an informative discussion. It's been great to have you here and we really appreciate your time.